Welcome, dear one. You've reached a precious moment in your day, the time to unwind, to let go, and to prepare for deep, restful sleep. As you lie in your bed, allow yourself to settle into comfort. Feel the weight of your body against the mattress, the softness of your pillow supporting you. Adjust yourself however you need until everything feels just right. Now, gently close your eyes. Take a slow, deep breath in through your nose, feeling your chest rise as you fill your lungs. Hold it for a moment, then exhale softly through your mouth. Let's do this again. Breathe in deeply, and as you exhale, release any tension from your body. With every breath, feel yourself sinking a little deeper into relaxation. Picture yourself in a serene place as your day's worries fade away. You're standing at the edge of a quiet meadow at twilight. The sky above is painted in soft shades of lavender and gold, with the first stars beginning to twinkle. A gentle breeze brushes your skin, cool and soothing, carrying the faint scent of flowers and fresh earth. In this tranquil scene, you notice a path winding ahead. Each step you take along this path feels effortless, as if the ground itself is inviting you forward. The sounds of nature surround you, the rustling leaves, the soft chirp of crickets, and the distant murmur of a stream. Soon, you arrive at a small, cozy cottage tucked between the trees. A warm golden light spills from its windows, beckoning you inside. As you step through the door, you feel instantly at home. The space is simple but perfect, a crackling fire in the hearth, the scent of lavender and cedar in the air, and in the corner, a bed piled high with soft, inviting blankets. You move toward the bed and lie down. The mattress cradles you, the blankets wrapping you in warmth and safety. The sound of the fire crackling is like a gentle lullaby, coaxing you deeper into relaxation. As you rest in this peaceful place, let go of any lingering thoughts from the day. Imagine them drifting away like leaves carried by a gentle stream. Here, there is nothing to fix, nothing to do, just rest. Feel your breath becoming slower and steadier, your body heavier and more relaxed. With each moment, you drift closer to the soft, quiet embrace of sleep. Let yourself sink into this restful state, knowing that you are safe, loved, and completely at peace. Now, it's time to let go fully. Drift into dreams, into calm, and into the soothing stillness of the night. Good night, dear one. Sleep deeply and wake refreshed.
Chapter 1. The plane touched down at Heathrow Airport under a shroud of mist. Outside the window, London greeted Brett with muted colors, a soft gray sky, wet tarmac glistening like glass, and a cool drizzle that blurred the outlines of distant hangars. As he stepped onto the jet bridge, the air felt crisp and refreshing, like the beginning of a story waiting to unfold. Brett moved unhurriedly through the bustling terminal, his suitcase rolling softly behind him. The voices around him, a blend of British accents and various languages, seemed to weave together into a comforting hum. He paused briefly at a coffee stand, warming his hands around a cup of tea while he watched travelers stream past. It had been months since he'd taken a moment to truly unwind, and now he had 4 whole days to let the world slow down. Outside, a black cab was waiting. The driver, a man with salt and pepper hair and a warm smile, helped load Brett's luggage into the boot. "First time in London?" the driver asked as they pulled away from the curb. "It is," Brett replied, settling into the plush seat. "I'm here to explore, relax, and soak in the history." "You've come to the right place, mate," the driver said with a chuckle. "This city's got more history than you can shake a stick at." "Where are you headed?" "Bloomsbury," Brett said. I've booked a room at a small hotel there. Good choice. Nice and central, close to the British Museum and a lot of quiet streets to wander. As the cab glided through the wet streets, Brett let his gaze drift to the scenery outside. The city unfolded like a painting, grand stone facades of historic buildings, wrought iron lampposts glowing softly in the mist, and glimpses of lush green squares tucked between rows of Georgian townhouses. Occasionally, the cab passed a red double-decker bus or a group of pedestrians huddled under umbrellas, their laughter echoing faintly in the damp air. Bit of fog today, the driver remarked. Makes everything look a touch more mysterious, doesn't it? Brett nodded. It's perfect. Feels like stepping into another time. They reached Bloomsbury, and the cab turned onto a quiet street lined with trees whose branches dripped with rain. The hotel stood near the end of the block, its red brick exterior adorned with white-trimmed windows and a polished brass sign that read the Bloomsbury House. It was charming and unassuming, exactly the kind of place Brett had hoped for. After checking in, he climbed the narrow staircase to his room. The walls were painted a soft cream, and the wooden floorboards creaked gently underfoot. His room was small but cozy, with a plush bed covered in a quilted blanket, a desk near the window, and a shelf stacked with books about London's history. Brett unpacked slowly, savoring the quiet. The rain had begun to ease, leaving faint streaks on the glass pane. He opened the window slightly, letting in the fresh scent of rain-soaked leaves and distant chimney smoke. Later that evening, Brett ventured downstairs to the hotel's lounge, where he was greeted by the soft murmur of voices and the clink of teacups. A fire burned in the corner hearth, casting a warm glow over the room. He ordered a light supper, a bowl of leek and potato soup with fresh bread, and settled into a leather armchair. An elderly man sitting nearby caught Brett's eye and smiled. He wore a tweed jacket and held a book in one hand while sipping tea with the other. Just arrived? The man asked, his voice gentle and friendly. I did, Brett replied. It's my first time here. Ah, welcome to London, the man said. I'm Edwin, a regular here. If you're keen on history, you're in the right city. Every street, every stone has a story. That's what I'm here for, Brett said. I want to take it all in. Start with the British Museum, Edwin suggested. It's just a short walk from here, and it'll give you a sense of how far back this city's history stretches. But take it slow. There's no rush, you've got to let London reveal itself to you. Brett thanked Edwin and finished his meal while gazing into the fire. The quiet crackling of the logs seemed to echo Edwin's advice, to slow down, to savor, to let each moment settle. Later, as he drifted off to sleep in his snug hotel bed, Brett felt a deep sense of peace. Outside, the city murmured softly, the occasional splash of tires on wet pavement, the distant toll of a clock striking 10. London, with all its history and charm, was waiting for him, and he was ready to let it unfold one chapter at a time. Chapter 2. The morning began with a delicate mist clinging to the air as Brett stepped out into Bloomsbury. The city seemed hushed, as though it were still shaking off the remnants of sleep. He pulled his coat tighter around him, savoring the coolness of the air and the muted sounds of footsteps on wet pavement. The British Museum was only a short walk from his hotel. Its neoclassical facade came into view, standing like a sentinel of history. Tall, imposing columns framed the entrance, their surfaces weathered by time yet standing resolute against the centuries. Brett paused for a moment at the gates, gazing up at the inscriptions and intricate carvings above. The structure seemed to breathe with stories untold, inviting him in. Inside, the atmosphere was one of reverence. High ceilings soared overhead, supported by rows of pillars that glowed faintly under soft lighting. Visitors moved quietly between exhibits, their murmured conversations blending with the faint creak of polished wooden floors. Brett's eyes widened as he stepped into the museum's heart, the Great Court. A vast glass roof arched above, its geometric panels filtering the soft gray light of the morning. The space felt open yet serene, as if designed to let both the history and the visitor breathe freely. At the center stood the reading room, its round walls holding whispers of scholars who had once sought wisdom within. Brett found himself drawn to it, imagining the likes of Karl Marx or Virginia Woolf poring over texts under its domed ceiling. He began his tour with the Egyptian galleries. Stone statues of pharaohs loomed like sentinels, their expressions enigmatic and timeless. A nearby placard informed him that some of these pieces were over 4,000 years old. Brett marveled at the intricate carvings on the Rosetta Stone, tracing his gaze over the ancient script that had unlocked the secrets of Egyptian hieroglyphs. "Beautiful, isn't it?" a voice said softly beside him. Brett turned to see a museum guide standing nearby. She was a woman in her mid-30s, with kind eyes and a small notebook tucked under her arm. "It is," Brett replied. "It's incredible to think this stone helped us understand so much of ancient history." The guide nodded. "It's a testament to human curiosity and the drive to make sense of the world. If you like this, you should see the Elgin marbles, just down the hall. They're fragments from the Parthenon in Athens." "Thank you," Brett said, his curiosity piqued. The guide smiled. "Take your time. There's no better place to lose yourself." Brett wandered deeper into the museum, letting each exhibit unfold before him like a chapter in a book. The Elgin marbles did not disappoint. Friezes depicting gods, warriors, and mythical creatures seemed alive with movement despite their worn surfaces. He could almost hear the clash of swords and the whispers of ancient prayers. In the Assyrian section, he paused before a colossal winged bull with a human face, a lamassu. Its intricate details were astonishing, feathers carved into stone, muscles rippling under imagined skin, and an expression that was both stern and benevolent. Brett stood transfixed, feeling as though he had locked eyes with a guardian from another world. By the time Brett reached the room housing ancient Chinese artifacts, he realized he had lost track of time. The museum was a labyrinth, each turn offering something new, a dazzling mosaic from Rome, a Viking hoard of glittering silver, and the haunting beauty of a Mayan death mask. Eventually, he found himself back in the Great Court, where a cafe offered respite. Brett ordered a pot of tea and a scone, taking a seat by a tall window that framed the rainy Bloomsbury streets outside. He opened the guidebook he'd purchased at the entrance, flipping through its pages as he sipped his tea. Each artifact he had seen carried a story that stretched across continents and millennia, and the enormity of it all left him both humbled and inspired. "First visit to the museum?" a voice asked from across the table. It was Edwin, the elderly man from the hotel lounge. He was nursing a small cup of espresso, his book closed beside him. "Edwin, I didn't expect to see you here," Brett said with a smile. "Ah, I spend most of my days here," Edwin replied. "History is a fine companion for an old man. How are you finding it?" "It's extraordinary," Brett said. "It feels like walking through the timeline of humanity. Edwin nodded approvingly. And it's free for everyone. That's the beauty of it, isn't it? Knowledge should never be locked away. They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the rain streak down the glass. The rhythmic patter of droplets added to the sense of calm. When Brett finished his tea, Edwin gave him a parting piece of advice. If you have time, visit the Enlightenment Gallery before you leave. It's a treasure trove of curiosities collected by explorers and scholars. You'll find it reflective. Brett followed Edwin's advice. The Enlightenment Gallery was a long, elegant room lined with glass cabinets filled with ancient globes, botanical sketches, fossils, and early scientific instruments. The space exuded an air of quiet wonder, as though the explorers who had collected these items had left a trace of their awe behind. Brett lingered in front of a cabinet displaying star maps, his thoughts drifting. How much there was to learn, to discover. And yet, the museum reminded him it was the journey, the quiet curiosity, that truly mattered. As he stepped back into the misty London afternoon, Brett felt a sense of peace settle over him. The museum had not just shown him history, it had invited him to be a part of its story. Chapter 3. The rain had stopped by late afternoon, leaving London's streets damp and glistening under a soft grey sky. Brett had spent hours immersed in the treasures of the British Museum, but now he craved something different, a place to sit, relax, and experience the hum of the city's social heart. He decided to visit the George Inn, one of London's oldest and most storied pubs, nestled in the historic borough of Southwark. The walk there took him through narrow cobblestone streets, past iron street lamps and cozy bookshops with their windows glowing warmly in the early dusk. The George came into view at the end of a quaint alley. Its timber-framed facade stood like a relic of another era, its windows glowing softly with the inviting light of a firelit interior. A sign hanging above the entrance swung gently in the breeze, creaking faintly as it moved. Brett pushed open the heavy wooden door, stepping into a space that felt alive with history. The interior was cozy, with low wooden beams crisscrossing the ceiling and walls adorned with aged photographs and paintings. A fireplace crackled in one corner, its warmth wrapping around him like an old friend. The pub was bustling but not loud, the sound of laughter, clinking glasses, and soft conversation created a pleasant backdrop. Brett found a small table near the window and settled into a well-worn chair. The polished wood of the table gleamed under the warm light of a brass chandelier overhead. A jovial barkeep approached, wiping his hands on a cloth. He was a stout man with a ruddy complexion and an apron tied tightly around his waist. "Evening, mate." "First time at the George?" he asked with a grin. "It is," Brett replied, smiling back. "It's incredible, feels like stepping into history." "You're not wrong there," the barkeep said proudly. "This old girl's been standing since the 17th century, hosting travelers from all over. Shakespeare himself probably had a pint here back in the day." "That's quite the claim," Brett said, his curiosity piqued. "Aye, it's true," the barkeep said. "The Globe Theatre's not far from here. The actors used to stop by after their performances, and who knows, maybe the bard himself penned a line or two right here." Brett chuckled. "Well, in that case, I'll take your best pint. Maybe it'll inspire me." "Coming right up," the barkeep said. "Name's Alfie, by the way. Holler if you need anything." As Alfie disappeared toward the bar, Brett took in the room. A group of card players sat at a corner table, their laughter punctuating the shuffle of the deck. At another table, a young couple shared a plate of steaming fish and chips, their conversation a quiet hum. The walls were lined with old tankards, maps, and faded posters advertising long-forgotten Alash. A sense of timelessness filled the air. Alfie returned with a frothy pint of amber ale and a small plate of bread and cheese. "There you go," he said, placing them down with a flourish. "This'll warm you right up." Brett raised the glass and took a sip. The ale was smooth and rich, with a subtle bitterness that lingered pleasantly on his tongue. "This is excellent," he said. Alfie beamed. "Brewed just down the road. Nothing like a local pint to make you feel at home." As Brett nibbled on the bread and cheese, Alfie leaned against the table, clearly eager to chat. "You know," Alfie began, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial tone, "there's talk of a ghost or two that lingers here." Brett raised an eyebrow. "A ghost? Really?" "Cross my heart," Alfie said. "There's old Tom, a coachman from way back when. They say he appears on quiet nights, looking for his passengers." "And you've seen him?" Brett asked, amused. "Not me," Alfie admitted, "but plenty of others have. Harmless, though, just a bit of fun for the tourists." As Alfie walked away to tend to another table, Brett found himself smiling. The charm of the George wasn't just in its history, but in the way it felt alive with stories, both old and new. A musician began strumming a guitar in the corner, the soft melody weaving through the pub like a thread of gold. The tune was gentle and nostalgic, evoking images of rolling hills and quiet country roads. Brett leaned back in his chair, letting the music wash over him. "Mind if I join you?" came a voice. Brett looked up to see an older man with a neatly trimmed beard and a weathered leather satchel slung over his shoulder. He carried a pint in one hand and gestured to the empty seat. "Not at all," Brett said. The man introduced himself as Henry, a local historian who often frequented the George. As the two sipped their drinks, Henry regaled Brett with stories of the pub's past. He spoke of highwaymen who had plotted their schemes here, of weary travelers who had shared meals and laughter in its rooms, and of the inn's transformation over the centuries. "This place has seen it all," Henry said, gesturing around. "Wars, revolutions, even plagues, and yet, it still stands. There's something comforting about that, isn't there?" "It is," Brett agreed. "Like a constant in a world that keeps changing." Henry nodded. "Exactly. That's the magic of a place like this. It carries the weight of history, but it also adapts. It's alive, just like the city itself." As the evening wore on, Brett felt a warm sense of connection, not just to the people he had met but to the stories that seemed to linger in the very walls of the George. When he finally stepped outside into the crisp night air, he looked back at the pub, its windows glowing softly in the darkness. London was a city of grand landmarks and sweeping history, but places like the George reminded him of its heart, the quiet corners where people gathered, shared stories, and found comfort in one another's company. Chapter 4. The following morning brought a soft, diffused light to London, as though the city were waking gently after a night of rest. Brett had planned his day carefully, and at the top of his itinerary was a visit to Buckingham Palace, the heart of Britain's royal history and tradition. After a hearty breakfast of eggs, toast, and tea at his hotel, he set off towards St. James's Park, the gateway to the palace. The walk was tranquil, the streets quieter in the early hour. Brett strolled along the park's pathways, where swans glided gracefully across the glassy surface of the lake. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and autumn leaves. As he neared the palace, the iconic wrought iron gates came into view, adorned with golden crests that gleamed faintly in the morning light. Buckingham Palace stood grand and imposing, its neoclassical facade a testament to the grandeur of the monarchy. Flags fluttered above the roof, indicating the presence of the royal family. Brett paused at the gates, taking in the symmetry of the building and the carefully maintained gardens surrounding it. Tourists milled about, their excitement palpable as they snapped photos and admired the scene. He joined a small group gathering for the changing of the guard ceremony. A tour guide with a crisp accent introduced herself as Amelia and began explaining the history of the tradition. "The changing of the guard dates back to 1660, she said, her voice carrying a tone of practiced enthusiasm. "It's a symbol of continuity, a reminder of the monarchy's enduring presence through the centuries. Watch closely, the precision and discipline are remarkable. As the ceremony began, the rhythmic sound of boots striking pavement filled the air. The guards, resplendent in their scarlet uniforms and tall bearskin hats, moved in perfect unison. Brett was captivated by their solemnity, their movements deliberate and almost hypnotic. The band played a medley of regal tunes, their brass instruments shimmering in the sunlight. As the ceremony concluded, the crowd began to disperse, but Brett lingered near the gates, his gaze fixed on the palace. The grandeur of the building was undeniable, but what struck him most was its quiet dignity. It seemed to stand not just as a symbol of power, but as a repository of memory, of triumphs, losses, and the passage of time. Amelia approached, her tour concluded, and noticed Brett's lingering presence. "First time seeing the palace?" she asked. "Yes," Brett replied, turning to her. "It's incredible. There's a sense of permanence about it." Amelia smiled. "That's what draws people here, I think. In a world that's constantly changing, places like this remind us of the things that endure." If you're interested, the palace opens its staterooms to visitors during the summer. You'd get a glimpse of the rooms where history is made. "Maybe next time," Brett said. "For now, I'm just enjoying the view." After a while, Brett wandered into Green Park, just adjacent to the palace grounds. The park was a serene escape, its pathways lined with towering trees whose leaves had begun to turn golden. He found a quiet bench and sat for a while, watching the world go by. A gardener was tending to a bed of flowers, her movements careful and precise, as though she were painting with petals. An elderly couple strolled hand in hand, their steps unhurried. A group of schoolchildren darted past, their laughter like birdsong in the still air. Brett felt a deep sense of calm, as though he were part of a larger tapestry of life unfolding gently around him. As the afternoon sun climbed higher, Brett decided to visit the Queen's Gallery, an art museum housed in part of the palace. Inside, the atmosphere was hushed, the walls adorned with masterpieces from the royal collection. Portraits of monarchs and landscapes from across the centuries lined the halls, each piece a window into another time. One painting in particular caught his attention, a serene depiction of a countryside estate, its rolling hills bathed in soft golden light. As he stood before it, Brett felt a quiet connection to the artist, as though they had shared a moment of stillness across the span of years. Before leaving, Brett stopped at the palace's gift shop and purchased a small book about Buckingham Palace's history. It was filled with stories of coronations, royal weddings, and state visits, snapshots of moments that had shaped Britain and beyond. As he stepped back into the crisp air of Green Park, the book tucked under his arm, Brett felt a sense of gratitude for the calm beauty of the day. Buckingham Palace had been more than a tourist destination, it had been a place to reflect, to connect with the rhythms of history and tradition. That evening, back at his hotel, Brett flipped through the book he had purchased, the stories of the palace coming alive in his mind. Outside, the city murmured softly, its lights twinkling like stars scattered across the earth. As sleep began to claim him, he carried with him the memory of the palace's quiet grandeur and the comforting thought that some things, like the steady rhythm of life, are timeless. Chapter 5. The day after his visit to Buckingham Palace, Brett awoke to a clear sky and the promise of exploration. The morning sun cast golden beams over London, revealing a city alive with both the bustle of modern life and the weight of centuries-old history. Today, Brett had his sights set on one of London's most iconic landmarks, Big Ben and the Houses of Parliament. After a leisurely breakfast, he made his way toward Westminster. The streets grew livelier as he approached, with the River Thames glinting in the sunlight and the occasional ripple from passing boats. The scene felt almost dreamlike, the stillness of the water, the quiet murmur of the crowd, and the stately silhouette of Big Ben rising proudly above the skyline. The clock tower, officially known as the Elizabeth Tower, was even more impressive in person. Its intricate Gothic Revival architecture was a testament to the craftsmanship of a bygone era. Carvings of angels, flowers, and intricate patterns adorned the tower, their details sharp against the golden hue of the stone. Brett stood near the base of the tower, gazing upward, his neck craned to take it all in. The hands of the massive clock moved with steady precision, a reminder of time's relentless march forward. Around him, tourists marveled at the sight, their awe-filled voices blending with the distant sound of a street performer's violin. As the clock struck noon, its chime resonated through the air, deep and sonorous. The sound seemed to ripple through Brett's chest, as though the toll of Big Ben was reaching out to him, drawing him into the rhythm of the city. "That's a sound you don't forget," a voice said nearby. Brett turned to see a street artist seated on a small stool, her easel propped before her. She was sketching Big Ben with quick, confident strokes, her fingers smudged with charcoal. "It's incredible," Brett replied. "Hearing it in person is something else." The artist smiled, her eyes still on her work. "I come here every day, just to listen. There's something timeless about it, don't you think? Like it's been marking the hours for generations." Brett nodded, captivated by her words. "Do you sell your sketches?" She glanced up, tilting her head. "Sometimes. But mostly, I draw for myself. It's a way to connect with the city, to feel its heartbeat." After a brief conversation, Brett purchased one of her completed sketches, a beautifully detailed depiction of Big Ben framed by the Houses of Parliament and the Thames. She signed it with a flourish, adding the date and a small note, "Time is a gift, cherish it." Brett tucked the sketch carefully into his bag and continued his exploration. He crossed Westminster Bridge, pausing midway to take in the panoramic view. To his left, the London Eye spun slowly against the bright sky, while to his right, the majestic spires of the Houses of Parliament reached upward, their reflections shimmering in the water below. At the foot of the bridge, Brett joined a tour group heading into the Houses of Parliament. The guide, a poised woman named Clara, led them through the grand halls with a mix of professionalism and warmth. "This building has been at the heart of British politics for centuries," Clara explained as they walked through the central lobby. "From debates that shaped the empire to decisions that changed the world, these walls have witnessed it all." Brett marveled at the ornate decorations, the gilded ceilings, the intricate mosaics, and the carved oak paneling. Each room seemed to tell a story, its grandeur a reflection of the weighty decisions made within. In the House of Commons, Clara paused, allowing the group a moment to take in the iconic green benches. "This is where it all happens," she said. "Every debate, every vote, it's all part of the democratic process that has defined this country for centuries." Brett imagined the chamber filled with lively debate, the voices of history echoing through the space. There was a tangible sense of legacy here, a connection to the past that felt both inspiring and humbling. As the tour concluded, Brett emerged from the building into the soft afternoon light. The air was cooler now, carrying the faint scent of the river. He found a quiet bench near the Thames and sat for a while, the sketch of Big Ben still tucked safely in his bag. He watched as the city moved around him, boats gliding down the river, pedestrians crossing the bridge, and the occasional cyclist weaving through the crowd. The steady tick of Big Ben's clock seemed to sync with the rhythm of it all, a quiet reminder that time was always moving, yet somehow eternal. Later, as the day gave way to evening, Brett lingered near the tower once more, its face now illuminated against the deepening blue of the sky. The chimes rang out again, softer now, as if bidding the city good night. For Brett, the experience had been more than just a visit to a landmark. Big Ben had offered him a moment of reflection, a chance to pause, to listen, and to appreciate the passage of time not as a race, but as a journey. Chapter 6. The morning light streamed softly through a veil of clouds as Brett made his way towards St. Paul's Cathedral. The domed silhouette of the iconic structure rose ahead of him, dominating the skyline like a guardian of the city's history. The walk from his hotel had been leisurely, the air cool and filled with the faint sounds of London awakening, a gentle rhythm of footsteps, birdsong, and the occasional rumble of a passing bus. When he reached the cathedral, Brett paused at the base of its grand steps. The building was a masterpiece of English Baroque architecture, its pale stone glowing faintly in the muted sunlight. Designed by Sir Christopher Wren after the Great Fire of London, it stood as a testament to resilience and renewal. He climbed the steps slowly, his footsteps echoing on the stone, and pushed open the heavy doors. Inside, the cathedral's vast interior greeted him with a sense of hushed majesty. The nave was breathtaking, its soaring arches drawing his gaze upward to the great dome. The intricate mosaics and painted panels seemed to glow in the soft light filtering through the high windows. The faint scent of incense lingered in the air, mingling with the quiet rustle of visitors moving through the space. Brett walked slowly down the aisle, his footsteps muffled by the worn stone floor. At the far end of the cathedral, the altar gleamed under the light of a chandelier, its gold and white detailing shining like a beacon. A guide, a kind-looking man with silver hair and a quiet demeanor, approached Brett with a welcoming nod. "First time at St. Paul's?" he asked softly. "Yes," Brett replied, his voice naturally lowering to match the reverence of the space. "It's even more incredible than I imagined." The guide smiled. "It tends to have that effect. Sir Christopher Wren designed it to inspire awe, and it has done so for over 3 centuries. If you're up for a bit of a climb, the Whispering Gallery offers a unique experience." "What's the Whispering Gallery?" Brett asked. "It's a circular balcony inside the dome," the guide explained. "It's said that even the softest whispers can travel across its surface. A marvel of acoustics." Intrigued, Brett made his way to the narrow staircase leading up to the dome. The climb was long and winding, the stone steps spiraling upward through the ancient structure. His footsteps echoed faintly, a steady rhythm that matched his breath. He paused at a small window along the way, peering out to see the sprawling city below, a patchwork of rooftops, winding streets, and the shimmering ribbon of the Thames. When he reached the Whispering Gallery, the view inside was equally breathtaking. The intricate details of the dome's interior were visible up close, from its gilded patterns to the grand murals depicting biblical scenes. The gallery curved in a perfect circle around the dome, its railing lined with a few other visitors, each marveling at the space in respectful silence. Brett found a quiet spot along the railing and leaned against it, letting the grandeur of the space sink in. He experimented with the gallery's unique acoustics, murmuring a few words and listening as they carried across the curve to the far side. It was as though the dome itself had become a vessel for whispers, holding each word gently before letting it fade into the stillness. "Impressive, isn't it?" came a voice from nearby. Brett turned to see a middle-aged woman with a notebook in her hand. She wore glasses and had a thoughtful expression, as though she were capturing every detail in her memory. "It's incredible," Brett replied. "You feel connected to something larger here." She nodded. "I come here often when I need to think. There's something about this place that quiets the noise of the world." "I'm Clara, by the way." "Brett," he said, offering a smile. "Do you work here?" "No, I'm a writer," Clara said. "I like to think of places like this as wellsprings of inspiration. They remind me of how much history and resilience is woven into the fabric of our lives." The two fell into an easy conversation, exchanging reflections on the cathedral and the city beyond. Clara shared stories of St. Paul's during the Blitz, when it had stood tall against the bombings, a symbol of hope for the people of London. "They say Winston Churchill insisted on saving it at all costs," she said, her voice tinged with admiration. "He knew it wasn't just a building, it was a beacon." As they spoke, the soft murmur of other visitors and the faint echoes of footsteps created a peaceful soundtrack. The cathedral felt alive, not just with the presence of its visitors, but with the whispers of the past it seemed to hold within its walls. Before descending, Clara recommended that Brett climb further to the stone gallery, an outdoor viewing platform. "The view is worth the effort," she said with a smile. Taking her advice, Brett made the climb. When he stepped out onto the stone gallery, he was greeted by a sweeping panorama of London. The city stretched out in every direction, its landmarks standing proudly against the skyline. The river shimmered in the afternoon light, its gentle curves threading through the bustling metropolis. Brett lingered there, leaning against the railing as a light breeze ruffled his hair. The view was both grounding and uplifting, a reminder of the vastness of the world and his small but meaningful place within it. Later, as Brett made his way back down to the nave, he paused for a moment of reflection. St. Paul's Cathedral had been more than a historic landmark, it had been a sanctuary, a place of quiet connection with something timeless and profound. When he stepped back into the bright streets of London, he carried with him a sense of peace, as though the whispers of the cathedral had followed him, guiding his thoughts with a gentle touch. Chapter 7. By late afternoon, the bustling energy of London had softened into a gentle rhythm. The Thames shimmered under the warm hues of the setting sun as Brett made his way toward the south bank. He had saved this particular experience for the end of the day, a ride on the London Eye. The thought of seeing the city bathed in twilight, its landmarks lit by the golden glow of sunset, filled him with quiet anticipation. As he approached, the Eye came into view, its massive white wall standing like a beacon of modern elegance amidst the historic surroundings. Against the orange and pink sky, the capsules slowly ascended, each carrying passengers eager to glimpse London from above. Brett joined the queue, the hum of quiet chatter and the occasional click of cameras creating a subdued but lively atmosphere. Once inside his capsule, Brett took a seat on the curved bench and leaned against the cool glass. The doors had sealed with a faint hiss, enclosing him and a small group of fellow passengers in a private bubble. The capsule rose slowly, offering an ever-expanding view of the city below. The first few moments were filled with quiet awe. The Thames unfurled like a silver ribbon, winding its way through the city's heart. Brett could see the jagged spire of the Shard piercing the sky, the iconic dome of St. Paul's Cathedral glowing softly, and the ornate clock face of Big Ben illuminated against the deepening blue. A young woman sitting across from Brett broke the silence. "It's breathtaking, isn't it?" she said, her voice tinged with wonder. "It really is," Brett replied. "I didn't think London could look even more magical, but this view proves me wrong." She smiled and introduced herself. "I'm Sophie." "First time on the Eye?" "First time in London, actually," Brett said. "And this feels like the perfect way to see it all." The capsule rose higher, and Sophie pointed out landmarks below. "There's the Houses of Parliament, and if you look just past it, you can see Westminster Abbey. Over there, that's the Tate Modern." Brett followed her gaze, marveling at the way the landmarks seemed to tell a story of the city's history. "It's incredible how old and new blend so seamlessly here," he said. "Everywhere you look, there's a piece of the past sitting right next to the future." "That's what makes London so special," Sophie agreed. "It's constantly changing, but it never loses its roots." As the capsule reached the apex of its rotation, Brett felt a deep sense of stillness. The city stretched out in all directions, its lights twinkling like scattered stars. The sunset had faded into twilight, painting the horizon with shades of lavender and indigo. For a moment, it felt as though time had paused, leaving only the quiet hum of the capsule and the soft murmur of voices. "Do you travel often?" Sophie asked, breaking the silence. "Not as much as I'd like," Brett admitted. "Work keeps me busy, but I've been trying to make more time for trips like this, slower, more meaningful ones." She nodded thoughtfully. "That's the best kind of travel, I think. It's not just about seeing places, but about feeling them, letting them change you." Her words lingered with Brett as the capsule began its descent. He watched the city come alive with lights, the streets below pulsing with movement. The energy of London was palpable, yet from this height, it felt distant, softened by the perspective the eye offered. As they neared the ground, the ride felt too short, yet somehow perfectly complete. The capsule touched down gently, and Brett stepped out with a sense of lightness, as though he'd left a part of himself behind, suspended in the air above the city. He thanked Sophie for the conversation, and they exchanged goodbyes, each promising to carry the serenity of the ride with them. Brett wandered along the south bank for a while, the eye glowing brightly behind him, its reflection rippling in the Thames. Before heading back to his hotel, Brett found a quiet bench overlooking the river. The city's lights danced on the water, and the cool evening air carried the faint sound of laughter and music from a nearby street performer. Brett took out the sketch of Big Ben he had purchased the day before, running his fingers over the charcoal lines. In this moment, London felt both vast and intimate, its stories layered like a rich tapestry. Brett closed his eyes, letting the memory of the ride and the city's quiet hum carry him into a state of calm reflection. Chapter 8. The next morning, Brett woke to the sound of gentle rain pattering against the window of his hotel. By midday, the drizzle had eased, and he set out for another of London's vibrant gems, Covent Garden. Known for its lively atmosphere, street performers, and cultural vibrancy, the area promised a mix of energy and charm that Brett felt would complement the serenity of his previous adventures. The streets leading to Covent Garden were alive with activity, yet not overwhelming. Shops displayed colorful wares in their windows, and cafe patios buzzed with quiet conversation. As Brett turned a corner, the historic piazza opened before him, a grand space surrounded by elegant arcades and bustling with life. At the center of the square, a group of street performers had gathered a crowd. Brett moved closer, intrigued by the sound of classical music weaving through the air. A quartet of musicians played under the shelter of the grand arches, their bows gliding effortlessly over the strings of their violins and cello. The melody was soft and wistful, drawing the crowd into a shared stillness. Brett lingered, the music tugging at something deep within him. The performers played with passion and precision, their eyes occasionally meeting as if sharing a secret known only to them and the notes they conjured. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" a voice said beside him. Brett turned to see an older woman in a bright yellow scarf. She held a steaming cup of coffee and wore a look of serene contentment. "It is," Brett replied. "Music like this makes everything else fade away." She nodded. "That's the magic of Covent Garden. No matter how many times you visit, there's always a moment that feels like it's just for you." When the quartet finished, the crowd erupted into applause. Brett dropped a few coins into the open violin case before continuing his exploration. The arcades were lined with shops and market stalls selling everything from handmade jewelry to artisan chocolates. The scent of freshly baked pastries wafted from a nearby bakery, tempting Brett to stop for a treat. He stepped inside the small shop, where the warm smell of sugar and cinnamon enveloped him. Rows of pastries gleamed under the glass counter, flaky croissants, plump scones, and buttery tarts adorned with jewel-like fruits. Brett ordered a custard tart and a cup of tea, finding a small table near the window where he could watch the bustle outside. As he savored the tart, its creamy filling balanced perfectly with the crisp crust, the faint sound of singing reached his ears. Intrigued, Brett followed the music to the lower level of the piazza, where another performer had drawn a crowd. This time, it was a young opera singer, her voice soaring effortlessly over the chatter and movement of the market. Her song was hauntingly beautiful, the kind of melody that seemed to hang in the air, leaving the world in quiet reverence. Brett stood at the back of the crowd, his hands in his coat pockets, and let the music wash over him. The singer's voice climbed and fell with emotion, weaving a story that needed no words. When her song ended, the crowd applauded, and the singer bowed gracefully. Brett felt a swell of gratitude for moments like these, unexpected gifts that seemed to capture the essence of a place. Covent Garden, he realized, was more than just a market, it was a celebration of creativity, a stage for the city's soul. Afterward, Brett wandered into the apple market, a covered area filled with stalls offering handcrafted goods. He admired the artistry of the items on display, delicate glass ornaments, leather-bound journals, and paintings of London's landmarks. At one stall, a vendor was selling watercolor postcards, each depicting a different scene from Covent Garden. Brett selected one featuring the piazza at twilight, its arches glowing with soft light. The vendor, a cheerful man with a paintbrush tucked behind his ear, struck up a conversation as he wrapped the postcard in tissue paper. "First time visiting?" "It is," Brett replied. "Covent Garden feels alive in a way I didn't expect." "It's got a charm, that's for sure," the vendor said. "But it's not just the performers and the market, it's the people. Everyone brings their own energy, and it all blends into something special." Brett smiled, tucking the wrapped postcard into his bag. "Thanks. I think you're absolutely right." As the afternoon gave way to evening, the piazza took on a new kind of magic. Strings of lights illuminated the arcades, their warm glow reflected in the puddles left by the earlier rain. A jazz trio had taken over where the quartet had played earlier, their brassy notes adding a lively, festive air to the scene. Brett found a spot on the steps near the performers and watched as the crowd ebbed and flowed. Couples strolled hand in hand, their laughter mingling with the music. Children danced in the open space, their movements uninhibited and joyful. The air was filled with the scent of roasted chestnuts from a nearby cart. As the sky deepened to navy, Brett felt a sense of contentment settle over him. Covent Garden had been an unexpected delight, a place where the city's energy and creativity came alive in a way that felt personal and profound. Before heading back to his hotel, he paused once more to take in the scene. The performers, the lights, the hum of the crowd, it all felt like a symphony, each element playing its part in a harmonious whole. Brett walked away with a quiet smile, the echoes of music and laughter accompanying him into the night. Chapter 9. The next day, the skies above London were a soft, tranquil grey as Brett made his way to Westminster Abbey. The walk through the city felt almost meditative. The streets seemed calmer, and the muffled sounds of distant traffic blended with the occasional peal of church bells. When Brett arrived, the Abbey stood before him like a sentinel of history. Its Gothic spires reached skyward, their intricate carvings a testament to centuries of devotion and craftsmanship. He lingered outside for a moment, tracing the delicate stonework with his eyes. The building exuded a quiet strength, its very presence steeped in the weight of countless stories. Inside, the Abbey was hushed, its atmosphere almost sacred. The stone walls seemed to hum softly with the echoes of ancient prayers, and the faint scent of candles lingered in the cool air. Sunlight filtered through the stained glass windows, casting pools of colored light on the floor. Brett was struck by the sheer scale of the space. The high vaulted ceilings seemed to float above him, supported by pillars carved with meticulous detail. He walked slowly down the central aisle, taking in the grandeur of the nave and the intricate designs etched into every surface. As he explored, a guide approached, a woman with a gentle smile and an air of quiet authority. "Welcome to Westminster Abbey," she said softly. "Are you visiting for the first time?" "Yes," Brett replied. "It's overwhelming in the best way. There's so much to take in." The guide nodded. "This place has been at the heart of British history for over 1,000 years. Kings and queens have been crowned here, poets and scientists buried within these walls. Every corner has a story." She gestured for Brett to follow her, leading him to the coronation chair, an austere yet powerful relic of monarchy. "This chair has been used in every coronation since 1308, she explained. "Imagine the history it has witnessed, the hands that have touched it, the vows that have been spoken before it." Brett studied the chair, its wood worn and etched with graffiti from centuries past. It seemed both ordinary and extraordinary, its unassuming appearance belying the power it symbolized. The guide then led him to the Poets' Corner, where the names of literary giants adorned the walls, Chaucer, Dickens, Austen, and Shakespeare among them. Brett felt a deep sense of connection as he stood in the presence of those whose words had shaped so much of the world's culture. "Many of these are memorials, not tombs," the guide said, her voice reverent. "But their inclusion here speaks to the impact their works had on the world. It's a reminder that words can be as enduring as stone." Brett lingered, running his fingers lightly over the carved inscriptions. He thought of the countless readers who had stood here before him, each carrying their own love for the written word. After the guide left, Brett continued exploring on his own, wandering into the cloisters. The enclosed stone walkways were quiet, their arched windows offering glimpses of the abbey's gardens. The air here felt different, still, contemplative. Brett found a wooden bench along one of the walls and sat for a while, letting the calmness seep into him. The cloisters seemed to invite reflection. As he sat, Brett found his thoughts drifting, not just to the abbey's history, but to his own. The past days in London had felt transformative, each moment adding a layer of meaning to his journey. Sitting here, surrounded by centuries-old stone and the faint rustle of leaves, he felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. From the cloisters, Brett ventured into the chapter house, its octagonal room bathed in a soft light that poured through stained glass windows. The walls were adorned with faded frescoes, their medieval colors still visible despite the passage of time. He marveled at the intricacy of the artwork, wondering about the hands that had created it and the stories they had sought to tell. A plaque near the entrance caught his attention. It spoke of the room's use in the 13th century as a meeting place for the King's Council, the very origins of England's Parliament. Brett imagined the debates that had taken place here, the decisions that had shaped the course of history. As the afternoon deepened, Brett returned to the main sanctuary. A choir was rehearsing near the altar, their voices rising in ethereal harmony. The sound filled the vast space, each note resonating as though it were a living thing. Brett closed his eyes, letting the music envelop him. It was as though the abbey itself were singing, a melody that carried the weight of 1,000 years. When the choir paused, Brett opened his eyes to find an older man sitting nearby, his expression serene. "It's something, isn't it?" the man said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's incredible," Brett replied. "I've never heard anything like it." The man smiled. "This place has a way of making you feel connected to history, to faith, to something larger than yourself." As the light began to fade, Brett stepped outside into the cool evening air. The abbey's facade was now illuminated, its golden glow standing out against the deepening twilight. He turned back for one last look, his heart full of quiet reverence. Westminster Abbey had been more than a visit, it had been an experience of reflection and connection. The stories it held, the voices it carried, felt like gifts that would stay with him long after he left. Chapter 10. Brett's final morning in London began with a golden sunrise, the soft light spilling through the curtains of his hotel room. He lingered over a leisurely breakfast, savoring every moment of the calm before heading out. His destination was Hyde Park, a fitting conclusion to his journey, offering a space to reflect on the days he had spent immersed in the city's stories. The park greeted him with a serene beauty, its vast expanse of green stretching out under the gentle morning light. Paths crisscrossed the lawns, lined with ancient trees whose leaves rustled faintly in the breeze. Brett walked slowly, taking in the sounds of chirping birds and the occasional laughter of children playing in the distance. This was London's heart at its quietest, a place where time seemed to pause. He wandered toward the Serpentine, the park's tranquil lake, where ducks and swans glided effortlessly across the glassy surface. A small boat drifted lazily near the center, its lone occupant reclining with a fishing rod in hand. Brett paused at the edge of the water, the gentle ripples reflecting the sky like a moving canvas. Nearby, a man sat on a bench, tossing breadcrumbs to the birds. He nodded at Brett, a friendly gesture that invited conversation. "Lovely morning, isn't it?" the man said, his voice warm and welcoming. "It really is," Brett replied, taking a seat at the other end of the bench. "I couldn't have asked for a better way to end my trip." "First time in London?" the man asked, breaking a piece of bread in his hands. "Yes," Brett said. "It's been incredible: history, art, food, the people. Everything feels so alive." The man chuckled softly. "That's London for you. It has a way of leaving its mark. But the secret is to take it slow, like you're doing now. The big landmarks are grand, of course, but it's places like this that make it feel like home." As the man returned to feeding the birds, Brett rose and continued along the path, letting his thoughts wander. He came across a small cafe near the lake and ordered a cup of tea. The seating area was open air, offering a perfect view of the water. Brett found a spot at a weathered wooden table, the steam from his tea curling upward into the crisp air. A couple sat nearby, quietly enjoying their breakfast. A jogger passed by, their rhythmic steps blending seamlessly with the rustling leaves. Brett felt a profound sense of peace, as though the park were gently wrapping him in its embrace. After finishing his tea, Brett ventured deeper into the park, finding his way to the Diana Memorial Fountain. The simple yet elegant design of the fountain drew him in, its circular flow creating a soothing sound as water bubbled and cascaded over the stone. Children splashed their hands in the water, their laughter carrying on the breeze. Brett sat on the grass nearby, leaning back on his hands and closing his eyes. The sounds of the fountain, the breeze, and the faint hum of distant conversation created a symphony of calm. He allowed himself to reflect on his journey. Each moment had felt deliberate, like the city itself was guiding him. As the sun climbed higher, Brett walked toward the park's iconic tree-lined avenues. He passed the rose garden, its vibrant blooms adding bursts of color to the soft greens of the surrounding landscape. The scent of flowers lingered in the air, sweet and earthy. He paused at a large oak tree, its sprawling branches casting a dappled shade over the path. Leaning against the trunk, Brett took out the sketch of Big Ben he had purchased days earlier. He studied the charcoal lines, the artist's note at the bottom, "Time is a gift, cherish it," resonating deeply. The hours passed unnoticed as Brett wandered, each corner of the park offering something new: a hidden bench, a quiet pond, a statue weathered by time. Eventually, he found himself near Speaker's Corner, where a small crowd had gathered to listen to an impassioned speaker discussing philosophy. Brett stood at the edge, listening to the words flow, their rhythm blending with the city's vibrant energy. As the speaker finished, the crowd dispersed, and Brett began his walk back toward the park's entrance. The shadows had grown longer, the golden hues of late afternoon settling over the trees. He felt a bittersweet ache in his chest, the kind that comes at the end of something beautiful. Before leaving the park, Brett sat on a bench near the marble arch and gazed out at the horizon. The city beyond the park was alive with movement, but here, in this moment, everything felt perfectly still. He thought of the places he had visited: the British Museum, the George Inn, Buckingham Palace, St. Paul's Cathedral, and Westminster Abbey, and the quiet moments of connection he had found in each. London had revealed itself to him not just in its grandeur, but in its intimate corners, its whispers of history and humanity. It had given him more than memories, it had offered him a renewed sense of presence, of slowing down and savoring the journey. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, Brett rose and made his way back to his hotel. His flight was early the next morning, but he felt no rush. London, with all its stories and charm, had left its mark on him. And as he walked, he carried the calm of Hyde Park with him, a quiet farewell to a city that had welcomed him with open arms. The end.